So just a quick, I think you all know us, so I'm going to go into some specific things on where we are. So Walmart.com is our largest business. It was interesting, I had a couple of discussions earlier. There's probably a lot of people in this room who've never been to Walmart.com. Now, we're in Massachusetts, so I'm not sure if you've been to a Walmart, but I know most Americans have been to a Walmart, but most Americans have not been to a Walmart.com. We have a very large grocery delivery business in the UK. It works in the UK because it's a small market. Logistics distances are very small. We have a lot of stores in the UK. I think every Brit lives within 15 kilometers of one of our stores. That's easy. In the US, distances are much bigger. People aren't used to shopping this way, so it's a much harder transition. And then the emerging markets that we're really focusing on, China and Brazil. I'll talk about China a little bit later, but Brazil is the one where actually e-commerce has taken off proportionally earlier, and there's a lot of evolution happening there. So what do we need to do as Walmart? First is we need to expand. A store has about 120,000 SKUs, so different items in it. That's a lot to manage when you think about it, right? I come out of consumer goods again. I had 60 or 70 SKUs, a much different number. So how do we go about reaching more and more categories? Online, to be successful, we think you need to have at least 15 million SKUs. How do you manage 15 million different items? Right? That's a completely different process even than 100,000. So how do we go about that? How do we get into new markets? If to go into a new markets, we need 10 million items online. How do we source those? That's a very difficult process. Mobile, I think I need to talk a little bit more about because A, it's changing the way we operate, and B, is people used to think of the internet as a PC computer-based direction. Everything we see is mobile is going to be the initial area where developments happen, and then eventually they'll come to your PC. The customer experience. I talked to the dean about this yesterday. The Walmart customer experience is about cheap and cheery, right? You walk into a Walmart, it doesn't look like a Whole Foods. It's not supposed to look like a Whole Foods. The experience is around save money, live better. So we've always been focused around save money. Online, that doesn't quite work as well. People do compare about prices, but that's not the only thing they care about. And then the thing we can really truly differentiate on is leveraging the bricks and mortar side, becoming truly a continuous channel so that customers can go back and forth between and the way they actually behave. So if we look at the key 4 drivers that drive, and that's the strategy behind all the things you'll see, these are the 4 key things that we're working on. Assortment. So how do we go as far as we can to get you 15, 20, 30 million different items? I think there was a note at some point from Jeff Bezos where he says, I want to sell everything that's ever been sold. Right? That's the idea of a store online, is you've got to have everything. Now, everything is difficult, so there's a few things we're going to leave out, but that's the idea of being an online store. Price. Our brand promise is to be the cheapest. We're working on that, and we're going to push that really hard. The customer experience. What do we need to do to get you the right experience online? Because that's a difficult thing to do. It's very different, right? There's nobody to interact with. We need to get the feedback through the interactions you have, the way you click through the site. How do we build that? How do we get you the right experience? And then access. Again, do you want it at home? Do you want it in the store? How do we get it to you is a big question. Mobile, I think, is moving that forward dramatically. We can engage you much, much more personally, right? It used to, or it is called the PC, but if you think of a personal device, your mobile phone is your personal device, not your PC. We can engage you much, much more. So what are the technologies we need to have to be that we are really on that front page of your mobile device that we get to often? And how do we get a customer-centric experience? You should be interacting with the mobile device you want to, not the way we want to as the technology company. Without going through a lot of these details here, I'm going to show you a couple of examples. One of the newest applications we've come out with for those on an iPhone is a shopping list. If you stand in front of the fridge, all you do is you talk to your iPhone. It generates a shopping list out of that. It adds the coupons. It'll tell you what brands are available, which ones aren't in your store. It can tell you how to actually walk through the store so you can be efficient, right? Walmart's 200,000 square feet. You don't want to go through the whole store. So how do we make that shopping transaction as easy as possible for you? So one of the things we've looked at is the iPad, right? It came out about 18 months ago. People shop differently on an iPad than they do on an iPhone or on a computer. How do we know that? Well, there's a whole bunch of studies around it. And for those of you who have an iPad, you probably sit on your couch while you're watching TV. The way iPad shopping works is much, much more like a catalog. People want to browse through things. Maybe they're doing it on a Sunday morning instead of the Sunday morning newspaper. They know they're going to go to Walmart later in the day. Let's figure out what's in Walmart. So for those of you with an iPad, I'm going to ask you to download it at some point and go through the experience. It's very different in terms of how you shop on an iPad versus the Walmart.com site. How do we leverage all those experiences we've now had for China? The scary thing about China, it is growing so rapidly on the e-commerce side. It's between 2 and 3 years of US development happen in China every year. So China is going to catch up very rapidly. We think within this decade it'll be a bigger online market than the US. So that means we need to be there. We don't have the same store penetration in China that we do here, so we've got to figure out a way to really accelerate and be in China as early as possible. So how do we do that as Walmart? Luckily, we have resources. That's one of the nice things about being in the largest company, is we can do parallel things. So what we've done is we've got our own team on the ground building a Walmart.com site for the Chinese consumer that matches the Chinese consumer. But at the same time, we've started to make investments in existing China e-commerce companies. So Yihaodian is a grocery delivery business that started up in Shanghai a few years back. They now start to cover most of China. There are things we know as a retailer that they don't know, so this is a great kind of combination. And we're starting to work with them on how do we serve the China market. The other thing it really gets us is we've got Chinese entrepreneurs running that business rather than a retailer who's used to running a Walmart supercenter in the US, going to China and telling Chinese how to go shopping. So we're very comfortable around that. The other is it's an entrepreneurial environment. Again, if you're in a large company like Walmart, it isn't always easy to do things the way you want to. By leaving the company out there and as a separate company, they can continue to innovate and evolve as quickly as the China market does. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of the challenges we face as a very large established company, but with all the technology changes that are coming, there's some serious challenges to how do we stay ahead and how do we keep up with the evolution of retail, both here in the US as well as in emerging markets. Great. With that, I wanted to open it up for questions.
Hello. I guess I was just a little bit curious when you're talking about the save money in the price position. And when you think of online shopping, you think of absolute price transparency.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering what Walmart's doing there to reassert its price leadership, given I guess some of the news we've seen that question it.
Yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. Online, there are really two pieces that drive your costs, which in the end drive what pricing you can go about. One is scale on buying products. Without naming the competitor, you know who our biggest online competitor is, right? They've got reasonable scale. The other part that then comes in is the logistics fulfillment side. That's where we have to figure out how do we use our network to actually come down with lower fulfillment costs. So you're right that full transparency is there. But even if you go to Amazon, most people do not necessarily buy the cheapest item there because it depends on who it comes from, how do you handle it. And there are still a lot of items, right, if you're talking about 10 million items that don't compare directly. But that's one thing that we're driving aggressively is on the items you can directly compare, which ones do we want to be a leader versus which ones do we want to be parity on. But we're working in that direction, again, as the brand image says, to be the price leader.
It is no secret that Walmart is branching into the financial service industry.
Yeah.
And I understand Walmart has some success in Mexico and going to Canada. Can you give us some update on the strategy in that front, particularly in US and in China, if any?
Yeah, it's, for those of you that don't know, there's two large pieces of financial services for Walmart. One is we actually own a couple of banks, Canada, Mexico. We actually have a full banking license, so we are a bank in those two markets. I don't think we're going to replicate that in a lot of places. In China, just from a regulatory environment, we're never going to get there with the current regulations. The other big part, though, is prepaid cards. We're one of the biggest card issuers together with co-branded cards, and we do a lot of pre-bought cards. So one of our big businesses in China relates to selling prepaid cards. As you know, Chinese New Year comes up, you give a gift to most of your employees. Giving a China Walmart card is one great gift that we've found out that works effectively from a company to individuals. That gets them in as customers to us, but it's an ongoing business that we can continue to sustain to build traffic in the store. We don't want to become a full-fledged financial services company. There's a lot of regulations. There's a lot of businesses we run into that we're looking to pick things where we can save costs to the customer. But if it's a core business of like home mortgages and so forth, that's not our strength. That's not where we want to go.
So this question is regarding really when you are trying to think about commercializing these opportunities in the e-commerce space in China. As we know, it's very important actually to be able to localize and to tailor to the local customer segments, or to make sure that they have a fully sort of seamless experience there, right? And so I wonder if you can sort of share your thoughts in that space in terms of leveraging the global brand that Walmart has, as well as trying to be local.
Yeah, it's the global brand isn't quite as important for us, as we actually operate around the world, I think, with 85 different banners, so different store names on the front. What is more important is finding out how the consumer shops in a certain market. And let me take one example out of Yihaodian on something they've done since we've partnered with them. There is a model now out there where you can actually use your iPhone to order through QR codes. I don't know if most of you are familiar with those, right? It's you just pick up an item. What they've done in Shanghai subway stops is actually put a poster up that makes it look like a shelf between the doors on the subway stops. And you can go shopping while you're waiting for your subway train, right? You go look at the item, you click on it, it goes in your shopping cart, you click on the next item. So depending on how long your commute is, we work on trying to fulfill that as close as possible to the time you get home, right? That's something that we're looking at to really drive different behavior. And, right, what are you going to do in a subway stop? You're not that busy, right? So actually doing your shopping while you're waiting for the subway train is not a bad idea to really keep people engaged. So those are things that we're really looking at to drive engagement with the customer and to make it local so that people understand what's going on and feel like we're really helping them with their everyday life.
I have a question.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Could you tell me your current status about RFID?
Oh, that's much, much more on the store side. So I know it's an ongoing discussions, but I don't have any kind of details on that at this point. It's actually the last time I came to the MIT Media Lab was for RFID, but that was a long time ago. Sorry, somebody over here?
Okay. As I know, when you go to a local market, usually there are very strong competitors. And in terms of China, as I know, Taobao.com and Tmall.com is dominating the e-commerce market in China. And do you have any strategy about competing with the e-commerce giant in China?
Yeah, we wouldn't be there if we didn't want to compete. I'm not going to talk about them directly, but I'm going to use the US analogy. Is if you think of how you, and I'm not sure this applies to this crowd, but how I entered e-commerce shopping, my first place I went was eBay. My first purchases online came through eBay, which is very much like Taobao, right? But people have moved from a pure marketplace, consumer-to-consumer transaction, to business-to-consumer. There are certain reasons why that works. Trust is one of the biggest ones. eBay suffered through that. Alibaba is suffering through that a little bit right now. Trust is fundamental. So when I look at China, one of the things that we rely on Alibaba on is Alipay, because it's a payment mechanism that very much supports the way Chinese want to shop, right? The payment doesn't clear until the product has reached the person's home. That is very different from the way, for example, PayPal works in the US, where you pay up front and you hope you get the right thing. That process wouldn't work in China. So again, we're customizing it to local, but we also think that commerce moves from C to C to B to C, because it is more efficient in the long run. Because if you want to deal with your shopping list on a C2C site, you have to interact with 20 different people. And that's where a customer really slowly moves to business side.
So unfortunately,
Okay.
we're out of time. Andreas, thank you for sharing your insight with us.
Thank you.